And backlash against sanctuary cities already being felt on the campaign trail. So what does it mean, or could it mean, for 2016? Senator and presidential candidate Rand Paul joins us. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
America certainly is talking about this. Those who are engaged in politics are talking about the sanctuary city issue. What are you going to do about it?
I think it's inexcusable for San Francisco not to obey the law. Now, some are questioning what actually is the law. So we looked it up, and we found out that once upon a time when the city of San Francisco said we have an illegal immigrant or illegal alien that has committed a crime, and there's a detention order from the federal government, that there was a transfer. But the Obama administration made it voluntary. So we're going to introduce legislation that will say that when the federal government says we want someone detained, we want them turned over to us when you're done with them, that it actually happens.
Can you see the level of frustration? I mean, obviously we're sort of gripped by the tragedy of what's happened in California to this innocent woman just walking on the pier with her father. But can you understand the frustration of the American people who have literally almost been begging Congress and the House and the Senate and the President to do something about immigration reform, try to figure out this thorny problem, and nothing has been done?
Well, we often say that we're for the rule of law. That's what conservatives always say. But the rule of law means somebody's got to obey the law. And I don't think you can have whole cities or whole states just not obeying the law. Now, they say the law is murky. So I want to make it very explicit. San Francisco, you cannot break the law, and if you have someone who's here illegally, you have to turn them over to the immigration services. It needs to be explicit.
Have you heard anyone in the Senate say that we want to keep the status quo with sanctuary cities?
Well, it's funny. The Democrats say they like sanctuary cities, and they say that they're supposedly helping with crime. But I think if you talk to the family of this woman, you ask them, you know, are sanctuary cities helping with crime? I think they'd have a much different story to tell. And I think it's inexcusable. We have to have cities and states that obey the law. And I think what we're going to do through legislation is make it explicit to San Francisco or any other sanctuary city that you have to obey the law. I
don't want to put you in a position, but I'm going to, of having to explain something, your opponent's view. But tell me, what was the reasoning behind the sanctuary city? How does that make a city safer?
They say it makes a city safer by people are more likely to inform the police and trust the police if they're not going to be deported every time they talk to the police. The problem is that part of
which would have had no impact on this instance.
Yeah, the problem is that part of what you want immigration. Remember when the Mariolettos were dumped here by Cuba? These were criminals. He emptied his jails and he just dumped them on us. You want immigration services that work for the federal government to be able to ferret out are criminals being released into the community. And so I think it is an important part of government, and we have to do something about it. And particularly when we know someone is a bad person like this, when we release them anyway, it's not only flouting the law, it's really endangering people. I would think that there will be repercussions for those who release this guy back into the public.
One quick question, thoughts on the Iran talks?
You know, I've always been one who says that we ought to negotiate and that negotiations are much better than war. But I am concerned about the sincerity of the Iranians, and I'm still waiting to see exactly what will happen with the talks. I was concerned a month ago when the president's spokesman came forward and said, well, it's inevitable they'll still be committing terrorism after the agreement and that they'll be developing ballistic weapons. And I think that's still part of the discussions right now, whether or not they will still be developing ballistic weapons.
Do you have the sense that the administration is leaning towards an agreement happening, or do you have a sense that it's falling apart right now?
You know, the president says less than 50-50. I think he's trying to show a little backbone and try to say, well, I'm not rushing into a bad deal, but it could also be a ploy that he's trying to show as if he's a tough negotiator and there still will be an agreement either way. But I think there's the one thing that they have mentioned really isn't a bad alternative right now, and that is that we continue with the interim agreement longer and continue to negotiate so we don't get a bad deal. But the interim agreement did call for reducing their stockpile from 20% enriched to 5%.
That's happened?
That has largely occurred, and I think that's been a good step forward. It isn't the end, but we also haven't released the sanctions. So I'm a believer that keep the interim agreement in place, which means they've had to reduce their stockpile, they've had to reduce the percentage of enrichment, but don't give up on the sanctions and let the sanctions go too quickly. I fear that letting the sanctions go too quickly with an untrustworthy partner will lead to Iran getting a nuclear weapon.
Senator, nice to see you, sir.
Thank you.